guest of the show. Ken, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very good, and I'm excited to talk to you about kind of one of my favorite topics.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure it's one of your favorite topics because you have a book coming out on the assassinations against Donald Trump. So, do you want to just briefly tell our audience about that? I know we are publishing it at the Libertarian Institute.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for the opportunity. It's called The Plots to Kill Trump, What the Investigations Missed and Why It Matters. And pretty much it's a real investigative look at all the assassination attempts against him. I think people might forget by now, but it wasn't just the July 13th, 2024 Butler shooting. We also had that weird guy who had been to Ukraine hiding in the bushes near
Yep.
his golf course in Florida about 2 months later. And we had, all the conspiracies about Iranian involvements. The book debunks that. And there were even some weird online plots that never really got off the ground. But we go into like the murky world of online extremism, how where these kind of sick kids are getting groomed. So it covers it all, and it should be good. Although these latest revelations have kind of complicated things. We're trying to add this in there at the last minute.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why I brought you on to talk about today. I really want to focus on the Trump assassinations, but also I know there's some other things you cover at headline news, like the Charlie Kirk assassination, January 6th pipe bomber, where I do want to get your take on these things. So, Ken, let's jump in here with I guess, the Butler attempt on Donald Trump's life. For years, we're told that Matthew Thomas Crooks, the man who took the shot at Trump, uh, didn't have an online footprint, and a lot of people thought this was odd. And then just a week or so ago now, Tucker Carlson came out with this breaking story. So I want to play this clip of what Tucker had to say and get your thoughts.
Yeah.
These are videos the FBI has worked hard to make sure you haven't seen. They're from the Google Drive account of Thomas Crooks, the man who on July 13th, 2024, showed up at the Butler County, Pennsylvania fairgrounds and tried to assassinate the frontrunner, Donald Trump.
And look what happened to our country. Probably 20 million people. And that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old. And if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
That day, Thomas Crooks came within a quarter inch of destroying this country. And yet, a year and a half later, we still know almost nothing about him or why he did it. That's because, for some reason, the FBI, even the current FBI, doesn't want us to know. Thomas Crooks was not some secretive lone wolf who never warned anyone that he was planning violence, just the opposite. Years before he showed up in Butler, Crooks was leaving a detailed digital trail of violent threats, including calls for assassinations and political violence. Second, they show a man who started out as a radical Trump supporter whose views on the president transformed, changed completely during COVID. The FBI lied about that fact and pretended that Crooks was a right-winger.
So, Ken, I got a couple questions for you here. I guess the first one is, what do you kind of make of Tucker's reporting? Do you think it's that he has like solid evidence here, that he's presenting it fairly, or do you have some maybe revisions to it you would like to make, or your own take on it?
Oh, I think it's really interesting. One thing, a slight correction to what Tucker represented, that the FBI claimed that he didn't have an online footprint. That's not quite true. Like, we all know that he was active online, but what the FBI said is that he wasn't really communicating with anyone. I actually obtained Thomas Crooks's internet metadata from his community college. Maybe 6 months ago, I did a FOIA, and the community college just sent me a bunch of jumbled up code, but I had somebody kind of decipher it. And it did show like all the websites he was visiting, which was in like 2023, which was like the last year of his life. This is interesting what Tucker got. It's from like when Crooks was still in high school around 2020, the COVID era. And it looks like somebody probably hacked Crooks's Google account to get this, because we've got his YouTube search history, and that's not something you can just scrape online. You'd actually have to have access to his account. And as the clip you just played says, they got access to his Google Drive too to find some videos. And when I looked into his Google account, to Tucker's credit, he actually explains the methodology for how they verified this. They linked the Google account to his email address. But if I tried to get in, and it's actually a two-factor authenticated to his dad. So it seems to me that somebody probably hacked this. And of course, we now know that it's not a source directly going to Tucker. It's actually a lawyer who's also going to InfoWars reporter Brianna Morello and the New York Post Miranda Devine. And actually, the first person to get this was Candace Owens. She bizarrely teased it back in September, and then said she was going to release it all the next day, but she never really returned to it, which I don't really know what to make of that. But getting to actually the substance of some of his search history and comments, it showed, he started as kind of a typical pro-Trump guy, and then COVID hits, he leans more to the left. But at some point in 2020, his rhetoric becomes downright like terroristic. At one point, he's talking to some guy about, the best way to overthrow the government. He's talking about blowing up federal buildings. Some of his search history includes like fertilizer bombs. And, I think the significance of this, or the upshot, is that it's hard to believe that he wasn't flagged by law enforcement in some capacity for these blatantly terroristic comments like on YouTube. So again, this is like when he's 16 or 17. We still don't know much about what happened to his life, when he's in community college, but it's certainly interesting and something to consider.
Yeah, very interesting. So, there's been so many kind of conspiracies theories circled around this particular shooting. From the research you did in your book, and I'm looking forward to reading it to know these conclusions. But did he act alone? Did there's I think phone data that he was around like an FBI building somewhere. So they've suggested ties with the feds before the shooting. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the phone data that comes from, I think, the Heritage Foundation's oversight project, and they basically said that they got his ad identification number, that's like, or geolocation data, and showing phones traveling to and from his house. They haven't released the raw data, but I do have a friend that has kind of verified some of the travelings. One phone like traveled to near an FBI office in DC. I mean, the significance of that is pretty unclear to me, because, there are a bunch of FBI offices in DC. If you go to DC, you're probably going to be within a couple hundred yards of some kind of shady government building. But I guess I do think there's something strange going on with this event, because to me, it's the security failures coupled with the mystery around Crooks. When you couple these together, it's just really damning. What the first thing that
Well, go into the security failures a little more, because that's what I want to ask you next, and that's where the most reasonable conspiracy to me was always that the Secret Service just either didn't care, wasn't trying, or allowed this to happen. And so where between the lines of incompetence and failure and maybe any kind of intentionality do you fall on this, and then why was there such a security failure?
I can't impugn intentions, but it looks just so bad to me. What I tell everybody is that the Secret Service did literally nothing that day. I think a lot of people know about, like, oh, they didn't put snipers on the roof that Crooks used because it was, quote, like a slope roof, which is like laughable. And then, of course, there's the thing about the perimeter only being like 150-yard radius, and that roof being outside the Secret Service perimeter. But it was covered by the Secret Service snipers, and a lot of people think that it was the Secret Service snipers who eventually like saved the day, when that's not the case. It was actually a local cop. So from the clip Tucker played, you heard first 3 shots, and then there was another 5 shots, and then immediately after that second round of shots, you hear a 9th shot, and that actually comes from a local cop on the ground. And then after that, you have 10 whole seconds before the Secret Service sniper finally puts the final 10th shot, the bullet through Crooks's neck. So really, it's the local cop who is a hero. And the thing that's really damning here is not only the fact that the Secret Service sniper waited a whole 15 seconds and 10 seconds after the firing had stopped before he finally shot. When he's interviewed by Congress, I've read both transcripts from his Senate and his House interviews. And at one point, he's telling Congress that I didn't see Crooks until he had shot 8 shots and he was kind of staggered around from the local cop's 9th shot. But some congressional investigator, a real hero, I wish I know who this was, confronted the sniper. He got notes that the sniper had written right after the incident, where the sniper writes in his own notebook that he saw Crooks, quote, crawling into position. And they confront the sniper like, what do you mean you didn't see him until the shooting had stopped? You say here in your notes that you saw him crawling into position. And he kind of demurs and says, well, by crawling, I don't know. He didn't give a good answer, but the senator didn't really press him further. But to me, that's just so damning that not only did he wait 15 seconds, but he's got like these contradictory explanations for why.
Yeah, that's a real problem. So, I guess back onto Thomas Matthew Crooks here, just maybe to wrap up here. Did he act alone? Would be my the biggest question, and then what was his, like, as far as you tell, motivation in this?
Did he act alone? I don't know for sure, but the thing I look at is that he was like a huge gamer who was active on this platform called Discord. And if you look up like the last 20 school shootings, at least half of them are kids who are hanging out on these Discord platforms, and they're either just talking to bad actors or occasionally to feds, like the 2022 Buffalo shooting where this white supremacist Peyton Gendron shot up a Tops Market. He put a link to live stream his shooting in a Discord chat room, and one of the people who accessed it was a, quote, retired Fed. And the Buffalo News broke that story, but nothing ever came of it. Of course, you have the 2015 Garland shooting where a radical, Muslim was going to draw up the Prophet Muhammad contest, and that case revealed that there was an undercover FBI agent encouraging him to, quote, tear up Garland. So, I'm that's still speculation, but I'm leaning towards that direction, that he probably was either groomed or radicalized online. And sorry, what was your other question?
It was just, did he act alone or have help, or I guess how it does seem just so unlikely, right? That this, and unlikely things happen, but that this kid could get a rifle, get into position, scope out the shot, and then come within millimeters of ending the president's life, right? It just, if you're telling me like it's a trained sniper who was in the military for 20 years, okay, it made sense that he acted alone. But this guy with no military experience and probably the first time he's ever tried to shoot a person, how the hell does that happen?
Well, okay, so this doesn't exactly address what you just said, but for the purposes of this show, I think your viewers will find this fact the most interesting. Is one of the most interesting things that I uncovered in my investigation is that there's this controversy of, after the incident, his body was released for cremation before it could be examined by Congress. I was the guy that actually got the autopsy and toxicology reports after a pretty lengthy legal battle. And the toxicology revealed that the medical examiner collected all these samples, including hair and bile, but didn't test 2 of them, or either didn't include the results in the report that he gave me. And this could have indicated him being on some sort of drug, psychotropic or otherwise. And, this might sound a little tinfoil, but I looked into the medical examiner. His name's Ariel Goldschmidt, and he's like in Israel after October 7th, working with another guy named Chen Kugel, and they were making these claims about beheaded babies. And so, like, you got a literal IDF asset who kind of totally tainted the evidence and botched the toxicology report in this case.
So I just want to clarify here. You're saying that the coroner who did the autopsy on Thomas Matthew Crooks was one of the main people who did the autopsies on October 7th victims and testified to one of the most heinous lies, right? These lies that, Gaddafi mass rape hoax and things like these justify mass atrocities. And so he actually told the lies, like the beheaded babies, that led to giving Israel the clearance to conduct the mass atrocities in Gaza. That's what you're telling me.
He didn't testify to himself,
Okay.
but you could Google his name, and I think it's like the Pittsburgh Jewish Chronicle. He talks about going there, and the page in the article, he's standing next to Chen Kugel, who did testify to all
Okay.
those things that you said.
Right, but it's still astonishing.
It's
Now,
a bizarre coincidence.
I guess last question on this for you. In this one, I've always thought there may be some, I don't know, nuance to it, but was Donald Trump actually shot in the ear? And I know people say shrapnel and the whole thing was a hoax. So was he actually shot in the ear?
Yes, most definitely. The Pulitzer winning prize from Doug Mills shows the bullet whizzing right by his ear. So you could look up Doug Mills, Butler shooting, Pulitzer Prize. You'll see the photo. And moreover, there's TMZ footage of Crooks firing like the first two shots. You don't see, it's not very good footage, but if you zoom in, you can see gas emitting from the rifle. So, yes, the guy on the gun, the rooftop did shoot, and then you see the bullet winging past Trump's ear. To me, that's pretty solid evidence. And then you just got to use your common sense and say, hey, the DOJ is trying to put him in jail. He's being spied on by foreign governments, by the FBI. His every move's tracked. The notion that he would be able to stage his own assassination attempt and get away with it. I mean, look at the people surrounding him. He's like got a bunch of incompetent goons. It's just pretty implausible. So to me, it's pretty clear that this was an authentic event.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about a very similar event. And I know you've been writing this book about the Trump assassinations. That's extremely important. But the Charlie Kirk assassination is just in the headlines right now. There's so many conspiracy theories swirling about it. And I think a part of the reason why I want to ask you is you do such a good job covering these events where the official narrative clearly doesn't make sense, but people who would typically be looked to in the independent media seem to be way off on what they're saying. And I'm not trying to take a shot at any person in particular, but as far as you could tell, like how close is the official narrative to the truth? And then what, big questions are you still asking or digging for right now, Ken?
Yeah, this might disappoint some people, but I do more or less buy the notion that this was probably Tyler Robinson, the alleged assassin. I still do have questions about it. He was said to use a 30-06 rifle, and there was supposedly no exit wounds. I think I'm not a ballistics expert, but I've also talked to other ballistics experts who say it would definitely have blown his head off, but I've talked to others that said that it could have entered. It was already on a downward trajectory. It could have hit his spine and the bullet fragments, and then there's no exit wounds. So it is plausible that that rifle did the damage. And to me, the biggest factoid supporting like kind of the government's narrative is the fact that he did allegedly confess to his father who turned him into the police. So, what father would ever throw his son under the bus to the government if he didn't really do that? So I kind of lean towards accepting the mainstream narrative. There are a number of troubling factors about this case, like government secrecy. I've had my FOIA requests for communications between Charlie Kirk's security team and the school. I wanted all communications and it was denied. I was denied the surveillance footage. The judge has a gag order on all the witnesses that are being used, which seems preposterous considering that the FBI and the Trump administration has been able to politicize this and hold so many press conferences and call for retribution, but you can't even, like, the dad has a gag order, all the lawyers have gag orders. They've held secret hearings. Um, they're the both parties want to keep the media from being able to take photographs or to stream this or to televise the court proceedings. So, I'm not convinced either way, but, again, the fact that the family turned the kid in tells me that he probably was at least involved in some capacity.
Yeah, one issue that we have a commenter, bringing up, and one of my big questions too is just around the rifle. Again, this is kind of like a Thomas Matthew Crutch situation where to be able to get into position to line up this shot doesn't seem like it's necessarily an easy thing to do. They point out that if you're assembling a rifle, you got to be very careful on how you scope it in, particularly if he's not like a trained sniper or something like that. And then, people point to the disassembly of the gun and things like that as creating problems for the Fed timeline. So do you have any issues around the gun and transporting it off the roof and making the shot, scoping it in, things like that?
Yeah, so I think people are under the assumption that he assembled the rifle on the rooftop. And there is, like, in the affidavit, they say they found a screwdriver, which I don't know what they're even trying to suggest with that. But I've seen videos of people, you could put a 30-06 like in your pants and walk kind of awkwardly. And you do see him in the footage, or the kid or the guy walking kind of like with a limp. So it is possible that he just had the rifle in his pants, went up to the rooftop, took it out, took the shot, and then escaped. Again, though, we don't have the surveillance footage. Like, we have him running off the roof and jumping off and going away, but we actually don't have the footage of him taking a shot. So, the commenter raises a good issue, and I would like to see the full surveillance footage.
Absolutely. And hopefully, we get that information. Now, I guess the last thing with the Charlie Kirk assassin is, do you think he acted alone? I know there's some people who are alleging, like, multinational conspiracies, people pointing the finger at Turning Point USA. And also, I think, in my estimation, maybe much more reasonably, like at the roommate or other people who are around Tyler Robinson. Again, it just seems like to be able to, like, get the rifle, to get into position without being detected, and then to be able to take one shot and make it, all seem like very hard things to accomplish on your own.
Yeah, and even Charlie's director of security, Brian Harple, raised this in his recent interview with that Sean Ryan CIA guy. He says the vantage point from where Tyler Robinson or the rooftop gunman would have been was like a perfect line of sight, where if he would have been 5 yards to the left or 5 yards to the right, he wouldn't have had any kind of good vantage. And so that does suggest to me that he had to have scoped out the campus beforehand. Pretty sophisticated plan. He was able to get away for over 30 hours. I would imagine there probably were others involved, and I would look to his former roommate. And, a lot of people are saying, oh, this was like some left-wing network. And I don't know if we'll ever find that out, because I think the DOJ actually wants to use the roommate as a witness. So now they're kind of in an awkward position. Like, do we want to use this roommate and try to help secure this conviction, or do we want to try to implicate a wider network? I know, Kash Patel has claimed that they're investigating others. And then you've got a lot of people on the right suggesting this is some sort of left-wing conspiracy. I'm not really sure at this point.
Yeah, great analysis there, Ken. Now, before I let you go, I want to ask you about updates on the January 6th pipe bomber. This is a story that really gets left out of all the January 6th stuff. There was recently this big report from Blaze News that they have finally identified the January 6th pipe bomber as a former Capitol Hill police officer. And so I'm wondering what you think about the reporting from the Blaze, and then we could go from there.
Yeah, sure. And just, I guess, for people who've forgotten, the significance of the pipe bomb case is that they found these devices about a mile away near the RNC and DNC around noon and 1 p.m., right when the violence at the Capitol was kicking off on January 6th. And so the theory, whether you think it's an inside job or organic right-wing terrorism, was that these devices diverted law enforcement resources and attention away from the Capitol, which is one of the reasons why the riot got out of hand. There's, of course, the case that it's almost implausible that the FBI wouldn't be able to track down the pipe bomber in 4 or 5 years, which leads us to this Blaze report, which claims to have identified the suspect based off of gait recognition, which is basically analysis of how somebody walks. And they say that this female Capitol police officer, who was actually part of the crowd control on January 6th, walks almost identically to the suspect in the surveillance footage from the night of January 5th that the FBI released. To me, this is pretty interesting, but certainly not nearly enough to go off of. I think people familiar with this software will say that if you take a sample of 1,000 people, you're going to have a couple people that are, a 99% match or whatever it was. We also have this issue where apparently the FBI was surveilling this lady's neighbors, which again is like a really hell of a coincidence, but so far it's only circumstantial evidence. And the FBI and I think the DOJ have come out and said this ain't it, and we're still investigating. So it seems to me that the Blaze is could be in trouble, could be getting sued pretty soon. I know the alleged suspect's lawyer has called it defamatory. And I guess my issue with this story is, like, let's say they are onto something and maybe this lady was somehow involved. Well, the Blaze hasn't proved it. They don't have the evidence. And now she could successfully sue. And then she'll say, oh, it's debunked. And this whole theory that it's an inside job is conspiracy. You guys are all crazy. And now we'll never be able to prove it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when I saw that reporting, I thought to myself, well, if a prosecutor had brought to me gate analysis, I would have probably laughed at it and thought this is absurd. So I'm not quite sure. Like you said, there has been some that reporting that somewhat corroborates it. Now, I guess, where are you currently when it comes to the January 6th pipe bombing suspect, or where, I guess, are you kind of looking for your future investigation here? What do you think we're going to uncover or find?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, I've done a number of stories on this case. I broke a story that the FBI had a suspect by January 10th, but I'm not really investigating this case very closely. I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens. I can tell you, I do think it was some kind of inside job. I will say that on the record. I mean, these devices were sitting there for like 18 hours. The Secret Service actually swept the DNC and somehow either missed it or it actually wasn't there yet and it was planted like 15 minutes before it was found. Either way, it's just very odd. They had bomb sniffing dogs there. And then Kamala Harris's convoy with Vice President-elect Harris goes into the DNC, and then she never talks about it when this is like the biggest act of terrorism she ever encountered. And it's almost like they didn't want to put attention on the odd circumstances. So it's a very bizarre, sketchy case. And, I hope for the Blaze's sake that they don't get sued into oblivion, and maybe the FBI will carry the ball across the goal line and help finish their reporting for them. Or maybe some whistleblower will come out of the woodwork with more information. But at this point, it's kind of a cold case, and it might be another one of those mysteries that never get solved.
So when you say, and if you don't have anything here, I'm just curious, when you say you think it's an inside job, what was the motivation of the government to do this?
It could have been either to smear the right wing as terrorists, or just, again, to distract law enforcement and divert resources towards the DNC and the RNC. Right, this is like within 10 minutes of the Capitol protesters breaching a barrier and like storming the Capitol. Like the timing is just absolutely insane to where like law enforcement's focus is on the DNC right when things were really kicking off at the Capitol. So that would be like the op, I guess if you want to call it that, would be just to divert resources
Interesting.
to make sure that the riot really ends up into this like national spectacle.
And so, just so I got this timeline right, you're saying that the bomb is planted like 18 hours before, but suddenly it becomes an issue 10 minutes into the Capitol Hill riot. And then, do you know like what percentage or how many Capitol Police resources were moved from the Capitol to the DNC headquarters to deal with the pipe bombs?
Yeah, I'm not sure on both of the questions, but to your first question, we've got surveillance footage of this hoodie person walking around with a backpack and supposedly planting devices outside the DNC and RNC. If that's the case, then yes, they would have been sitting there for 18 minutes and or 18 hours in plain sight. The lady who found it by the RNC like went out, walked by that area once, and then found it on her second pass by. She was like doing laundry. This lady is also a counterterrorism analyst, so that's kind of like a weird coincidence. But so we don't know. Maybe the person on the fifth was just walking by as a distraction, and the devices were actually planted like 10 to 15 minutes before they were found, because it defies, um, you know, logic that they would have been sitting there for that long. And even the lady who found the RNC one says that she thinks it was planted after like the first time she walked by, and then she walks in and finds it. Same with the DNC one. The Secret Service swept the area around maybe 10 a.m. that morning. Kamala Harris goes in and out of the building, and then it's like 1 p.m. they finally find it. So again, there's a question of like, did somebody actually plant it after the sweep? And is this suspect seen walking around January 5th? Is that like a total diversion? Was that some sort of op to distract people? This is something like different people have different theories about this. As to the question about diverting law enforcement resources, I'm not exact. I don't think people were actually sent from the Capitol to the DNC and RNC. But if you just imagine, being in some sort of like HQ and all of a sudden all these phones are blowing up and, they got to send the bomb squad and all these officers to the DNC and RNC, that does matter.
Right. I understand what you're saying. If you had two fires going on at the same time, you had to send firefighters to both, and that means you can't dedicate as many to one. So that absolutely made sense. Ken Silva, thank you so much for returning to my show today. I hope I can have you back on the show again in the future, and talk to you after I read your book, of course. And as all of this continues to unfold and we learn more information, it's really helpful to get your perspective again, where you're very careful about going through all this information, but you're also not just repeating all the Fed slop. It's a really important role that you guys are doing over at Headline USA, you and Jose Nino. Everybody, be sure you check out Headline USA for all Ken's work, as well as the Libertarian Institute, and follow him on X at JD Cashless. Ken, thank you so much.
I appreciate it.